Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to begin the workshop. If you are with us on Zoom, just want to let you know that the workshop will be recorded today. I believe the Language Center will put it onto the YouTube channel so you guys can also check back or share with your friends. I just want to, first of all, introduce myself and give a little brief kind of itinerary of what we're going to be doing in this very short workshop. So my name's Rebecca Bale. I am assistant professor in the Department of English Language and Literature. I actually have very little to do with AI at all, and I was quite surprised to be asked to do this workshop. But the reason that I'm interested in AI and academic integrity is because I have spent most of my career as a writing teacher. So specifically focusing on English writing and academic writing. So, of course, when we talk about AI, we talk about this kind of software that we can use, and primarily we are seeing students use it for writing tasks, right, for writing projects. So I don't really have any AI or background, but what I'm looking at is how we can use these tools in a ethical way. Not to say we should not use them at all, not to say that we can't use them, that they are not useful, but to basically think about how we can change our writing practices to include them. I'm going to only probably take maybe an hour to speak with you. And if people have questions or comments, then I'll be happy to hand it over to you later on. So I want to kind of pull back a bit and start off by talking about the ethics of AI. When we talk about ethics, it's not just a new thing because of artificial intelligence, right? Academic ethics has been an issue for as long as people have been studying. In the past, it's been to do with copying from books. It's been to do with using translation software. It's been to do with all other kinds of tools we have. It's just that the latest tool. So when we talk about ethics, what are we actually talking about? So my starting point for this type of workshop is to basically think about what is the broader issue. If we don't specify AI, if we just talk about plagiarism in general, what is the problem? So I think it's interesting to think about different attitudes towards plagiarism between the students and the faculty. And I think from my experience, a lot of faculty think that students maybe are lazy, they don't want to do the work, they want to cut corners, they don't want to take their studies seriously. But on the other hand, if you talk to students, they will, if you ask them, why would you use this kind of plagiarism activity, they will tell you, oh, I'm very busy, I have a part-time job, I have family responsibilities, maybe sometimes I don't understand the assignment. So I think we also have to consider from both sides, right? What are the reasons that people are trying to use these methods to save time, to cut corners? And when does it become a problem? So we cannot say that all tools are not helpful, right? We know there are plenty of tools that we use every day. Even when people long time ago started using calculators in maths class, and everybody said, oh my goodness, nobody can add up because they just use calculator. Now we're all fine with it, right? So we do develop over time, we do learn about different tools, but the point is how to use them with some sort of ethical and what I would say like rigorous thought process. So if we think about plagiarism in general, I think there is a kind of difference in attitude between students and faculty. And sometimes this can be a problem because from the faculty point of view, they will say, well, the student committed plagiarism, like they use the word commit, like a crime, right? You did something wrong. You need to be punished. And then the student will say, but I just didn't understand the assignment. What am I supposed to do? So we have this kind of misunderstanding. So what I want to start off by saying is we need to think about plagiarism in general, include certain assumptions that students have and attitudes that faculty have. So faculty tend to be, and this is because of the way they were trained, very strict about plagiarism rules. And as you know, Xi'an University has, and I've put this little picture here from our website, has very strict policies on what counts as plagiarism, what counts as academic honesty, and it gives us examples of plagiarism. And you can take a quiz, you can do all these checks, right? We're all used to using maybe the Very Guide check, or there's a lot of others out there. So I think sometimes we need to consider what is it that the faculty think students are doing, what is it the students think they're doing. And what often happens in my experience, especially when you are writing in English, which is not most people's first language here, is that you are trying to find the best way to express a difficult idea. And often the student is not intentionally plagiarizing. The student is thinking, well, I have this idea, I know how to express it in Chinese, I need to just translate, or I need to somehow make it into English. So I think that's the first thing to say, that in general, we, both faculty and students, should educate ourselves and be educated about what it means to plagiarize. Why is academic honesty important? So the third point here I've mentioned is that to do with academic honesty, why do people make such a fuss about it? Why is it so important? I would say there's a couple of things. I mean, first of all, we tend to consider that our credentials would be devalued if we had found to have plagiarized from someone else, right? So we might find, even in very serious cases, we may have read about in the news where somebody's master's thesis or PhD thesis was found to be plagiarized and they had their qualification taken away. That's obviously a very serious outcome, right? And it devalues the credential. So you want to go out as a student and say, I have a bachelor's degree in this. If people don't trust you or believe you, then that doesn't help. All that hard work that you did is kind of meaningless, right? And then in a more general sense, people tend to mistrust the kind of expert or knowledge that you have gained, right? So if you say, no, well, I know this because I'm qualified to do this job because I have BA in English language and literature. If people don't trust universities, then they're not going to trust you when you come out as a fresh graduate. The same is true for faculty. Yeah, if our qualifications are doubtful or questioned, then that can have a serious professional impact. And the other thing I would say about that is I think there is also a little bit of a cultural difference, right? So we, whether we can say fortunately or unfortunately, our university system is based on the Western model. And in the Western model, the idea of copying or memorizing is not valued. I know that in some cultures this is different. So, for example, if you're learning, to do the Chinese painting, the best way to learn is by copying, and it's completely fine and acceptable. So sometimes we have to consider this cultural difference as well. Now, the fact is that we are working inside this Western structure, so we again have to, I think, as faculty and students, understand that the expectations may be different. Certainly, it's often hard for students coming directly from mainland China when I will ask them to give me their own opinion or to give their own answer. They will prefer to have me give the answer, right? And so this is also a kind of a process, right, which is related to. So if we look just specifically at AI, okay, some of us may be unhappy that AI is here. Okay, but we can't do anything about it. It's here. There's nothing we can do. We can't put it back in a box, right? It's here. So I want to suggest that we should not try to ignore it or just ban it. I believe that a couple of universities in Hong Kong have tried to ban using ChatGPT, for example, completely. And I don't think that that is really the right move. I think we have to accept it's here. And we have to accept that we can all use it. So how do we teach ourselves and teach students to use it ethically and responsibly? I mean, the first thing to say is that we teach students how to cite other resources, other references. When we ask students to prepare a reference list, for example, we say to the students, okay, go to the database in the library, find 5 journal articles and cite them according to APA format. Now, we should also encourage students to do that with AI. So if they use AI, they have to cite it, right? And the other thing is, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, the other thing is it can be very useful for things that are do not require a lot of critical thinking. Right? So, for example, let's say you watched a movie and you want to have a summary of that movie. Now, that's not asking anybody to use critical thinking skills. A summary is just a summary. And therefore, the AI can be really helpful, right? Because we can say, please summarize the movie, and it will do it. So there are places where it is a useful resource. And I think as we learn to use other reference works, right? So we learn to cite journal articles, we learn to cite web pages, etc., etc. We can also cite AI, and I'll show you a little bit. The other thing to remember is that, as you all know, AI is developing very quickly. So what it can do now is not what it can do next year, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. We actually don't really know. Right? So at the moment, the limitations of AI are in the writing field to do with things like false references and created data. So basically, if you, let's say you ask it to prepare a bibliography or a work cited, it will create references that do not exist, right? Now, that means, of course, you have to have the faculty checking the references, but also it's going to be pretty easy to find out that they don't exist, right? At the moment, and this will change, I'm sure, but at the moment, it will not always be accurate. So sometimes we may have to consider its false references, maybe not all of them, but some of them it just makes up. And creative data, right? Say creative data, right? That is, it will produce data that is not factually correct. So this will kind of give us a sense of its limitations. Now, I think that these limitations will change over time, because as far as I can understand, and I'm not really a computer person, but as far as I can understand, the app developers are constantly teaching the AI to do different things. So obviously that will change. And I will share this, maybe we can put it on the Language Center website. But I was looking at an interesting article from a computer science teacher in the United States who he's teaching at a university in the United States, and he was faced with this idea of what to do with ChatGPT, and these computer science majors were becoming very worried and depressed. Oh, when we graduate, we won't have a job, right? ChatGPT will do everything for us. So he decided to do an experiment. And his experiment was to have his ChatGPT take the final exam, just like all his students, right? What he found is that the good news or bad news, I don't know what you want to say, but ChatGPT passed, but it got a C minus in the final exam. So compared to the real students who got an average of about C plus B minus. So what we can learn from that, it's just like he shared this experiment with his colleagues, and then he kind of like told the students what he did, and they had some discussion about it. But what we can really kind of learn from that is it can probably pass the course, but it cannot get a high grade, right? So if you think about it, ChatGPT is like that very low-level student, right? The one who doesn't go to class, or the one who is sleeping at the back, the one who is doing all the revision the day before the exam. And so therefore, he can kind of see, yes, it's possible it will pass. It's not going to fail the exam, but it's not going to do very well either. And of course, this is in a computer science class, so it's doing a certain set of questions, multiple choice questions, and so forth. So, but I also wanted to introduce our ChatGPT, Xian. And has anyone used this? Yeah, just a little. How do you find it? Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a great example of, understanding its limitations, right? So just to revise for the people online, our colleague said he tried the chat GPT and he wanted to translate it, a poem from ancient Chinese to English. The chat GPT could not understand the ancient Chinese. So I guess I also, I teach a Shakespeare course, and I guess it would have a similar problem, that it wouldn't be able to understand the old Shakespearean English because it's been trained on modern English. So you were using it as translation, and it wasn't that great. Yes. And yeah, I think this brings us back to the idea of ethics, right? Because it is actually going to persuade us to buy something, right, in a way that we may not be persuaded before. For example, if I say, yeah, tell me what are the 3 best things, and it tells me, then I'm just going to choose one of those, which is bad news for a very small company trying to establish itself. So, anyone online used it at all? Anyone have any experiences they want to put into the chat? I'll keep going, but if you do have sort of interesting anecdotes about using ChatGPT, let us know. I think I've used it in one particular incident. So this was also kind of interesting because, as I said before, I generally teach English literature, and I was running a training program for secondary school teachers through the education department in May. And one of the things we were doing was trying to give them some strategies to improve the DSE students' level in answering these literature questions. We gave some examples of the exam script, and we asked the teachers to highlight, what is good about the script, what is the errors, what could the student do better. The final example, we didn't tell them, was ChatGPT generated. And what was interesting is what it did not do. And what it didn't do in that field is it did not use any textual evidence. So it said, we asked it, okay, I can't remember the poems, but we asked it, compare this poem with this poem. And it did this comparison. Oh, this poem is like this poem is about this poem is about this poem. But it never quoted any of the actual poems. So it didn't give any support to its ideas. It was like kind of a summary, right, almost. And so that was quite interesting because we could see, oh yeah, that's why it's like a C- student, right? It just gives us a summary. and it doesn't really go deeper. But I mean, I think it's obviously very different depending on what subject we are teaching, what subject we are studying, and that's another thing to kind of take into account. The way we use it in marketing, psychology, sociology, English, Chinese, it's going to be very different. We do have a very detailed set of guidelines which talk about the university policy on ChatGPT. And actually, it's kind of interesting. I think I might have to come out of here and to open the link. Give me a hand with this. So when I looked at what Xuyan has already done, I found it to be quite interesting because we already have this kind of policies, already have some terms and conditions, usage and policies. I'm just going to answer there was a question in the chat. Yes, I'll make sure that you can see the document. I'll make sure that you have access to this document. But basically, the general guidelines really focus on the idea of responsibility, right? And they talk about, yes, we have AI available to us. We have AI as a tool, but we have to use it responsibly. And this goes both for faculty and for students, right? So that we kind of understand what are the responsibilities of each set of people. And actually, they talk about it in assignments. I'm just wondering, you guys are students? Students, right? Have you ever used ChatGPT in an assignment? No. So one thing I noticed when we were looking through this, and like I said, I'll share the document with everybody. But one thing I noticed is that they very much talk about the types of documents that, the types of assignments. And I think I'm kind of like just aware of the time passing, so I'll just sort of make sure that we get to see that document. But what I notice, so I'll make sure that you have access to this document here, but basically these guidelines talk about university policy, and they talk about it from two different sides. The first is the side of the faculty. So the responsibility of the teachers to keep themselves up to date with how AI is developing, and their responsibility, as we've talked about, over which types of AI are allowed to be used by the students. So on the other side, the students also have to learn how to cite it as a reference. So that's why I was interested in if anyone has actually used it in an assignment or been told to use it by an instructor, because I think there's quite detailed guidelines and citation practices that the university as a whole has, but they may not kind of really be implemented yet. So it seems like maybe the teachers have not yet really put it into their courses, and maybe the students are a little bit afraid as well. So, there's kind of a learning process. The guidelines are very interesting, very clear, talk about what is expected of students, what is expected of faculty. Basically, my sort of overriding thing that I want to stress is that we need to train ourselves and students to cite programs like we cite other reference work, right? So that if we use it for something, and we'll talk about what we might use it for in a minute, but if we use it for something, we have to say that we've done so. Now, we're all familiar, I guess, with ChatGPT. That's the most common one. And here would be an example of how we would cite it, right? So let's say we give it some prompt and we ask it to, okay, let me give an example. I want you to summarize the movie about this, right? And then it gives us the summary. Well, what would we do to show that that's not our own work? We have to include it as an in-text citation. Okay, so if it's a direct quote, we're going to kind of put it in quotation marks. And then we're going to put it into the reference list like this, using OpenAI, the date that we used it, and also an add prompt, right? So what did we ask it to do? And the university guidelines have quite a detailed example of the way that you can do this. So not saying you shouldn't use it, not saying we can't use it, but that we can cite it as a reference. And why is that important? Why reference lists are important is back to the idea of ethics. Okay? Why do we spend so much time telling students to include the reference list, check your citations? Why do we do that? Because it gives us a foundation, right? So there's a difference between, say, like, I'm Rebecca, I say this. It's not really credible source. But if we have a journal article or a book or anything, gives us credibility, we cite it in our reference list. It's the same idea with credibility. Now, I know that according to different majors, they use different citation software, different citation styles. For example, social sciences use APA, right? In English, we use MLA often. But no matter what, we need to remember that we have to include it as a reference, right? That we can't just leave it as a part of our work without explaining this is constructed by AI. So before I sort of turn it over to looking at our survey and maybe opening up the floor for questions or concerns, I want to put together just a few final thoughts, right? What tasks can we use AI for? So I think this is obviously just my opinion, but I think we learn to use the tool rigorously, and I think we use it for tasks that lack creativity or critical. Okay? So whether we're students or faculty, we can consider what is the task I actually want to do, right? Now, these days, I hope nobody washes their clothes by hand. We all use a washing machine. We feel that, oh, I'm not a good person because I use a washing machine. No, of course not. Feel, okay, I hate washing clothes. I want to save my time. Doesn't matter. So I think there are certain tasks where this type of tool is really helpful. Okay, I can imagine that a student would want to write a summary. A student would want to maybe digest a large amount of information. Don't know if there's other things we could use it for. But there are certainly tasks that lack creativity or don't require critical thinking, because we know those things are what it cannot do, right? We can't tell it to paint a picture. We can't tell it to write a poem. In fact, some people have tried that, and it's quite interesting because it's not very good, right? But yeah, that's the side point. But there are certain tasks that we know it's not that good at. And I think this brings me on to the next point, which is both teachers and students need to think about getting used to different sorts of assignments. Now, again, this is a personal opinion, but I don't have final exams in my courses. And I used to have a big term paper at the end, a paper that was maybe 2,500, 3,000 words. Since learning about ChatGPT, I've become a bit more creative with my assignments. And I've tried to think about maybe not having one big paper at the end, which puts pressure on the student to produce at the end of the semester, which is a busy time, and is kind of tempting to use an AI tool. So I was also thinking about different types of assignments. For example, doing some sort of a dramatic or improvisation, right? So if I suddenly said, sorry, Steffi, I'm going to use an example. So I said, Steffi, stand up and tell me about your favorite poet. Okay, don't do it. It's okay. But Steffi has no time to prepare. She has no phone. She has no tools. It's improvisation. So that's kind of showing me, can she think on her feet, right? So this could be one thing. Also, I noticed that students are extremely good at making audio visual content, right? So asking students perhaps to do different sorts of assignments will give them a way to use their strengths. Making a video about something, making a podcast, making some sort of digital content. I don't know if you have other examples of what you think would be a good assignment that would maybe avoid using AI or avoid using. And I think what you said about the puzzle is really interesting, because I think the main difference is it can't fit the pieces together, right? And so that's what when we talk about like critical thinking, talk about putting the pieces together. So I can summarize this one and I can summarize this one, but AI cannot really put it together at the moment. I mean, perhaps that will change, we don't know. But I think for now, our value is in that critical thinking part. I was also thinking about that today because, as I said at the beginning, I often teach writing classes. And I was thinking, when we ask students to do an outline, actually, I wouldn't have a problem with ChatGPT doing that with them, right? Because you want the structure to be correct. So, for example, if you said, we're going to be writing an essay or a descriptive essay, you want them to have the certain pieces or parts, right? So I can see that would be useful. Getting the content, maybe not so much. The other thing is, we talked about this a bit before, but the other thing is, I think we need to consider AI as a sort of another kind of academic source, as we maybe talked about, crediting other work from other sources, right? We can always credit it, and I think in some ways by crediting it, we're sort of getting ahead of the ethics issue. If we are upfront about what we use AI for, then it helps to build trust, right? So if you say, okay, students, you can use AI to do your outline, but you cannot use AI for this assignment, right? And then that way we kind of trust each other a bit more to know, okay, well, I let them use it for this, they use it, that's fine, but not for this one. And that way, if we credit it, and the same is true, when we talk about crediting sources, we may say to students, oh, I want you to have 5 sources. Then the student will present those 5 sources. On the other hand, we might say, I don't want you to have sources, I want you to give your personal opinion, and don't use the sources. And so if we actually get into the habit of, this is crediting the AI, this is what I used AI for, this is what I didn't use it. And I think that also builds trust on both sides. As we said, it's not always accurate, right? We come back to this point at the beginning, especially with translations, especially with maybe older style language, also with references, it's not particularly accurate. And my kind of final question goes back to the idea a bit about leveling the playing field. What I mean by this English idiom, leveling the playing field, it means if we can all use AI, then both teachers and students are on the same level, right? So because it's free at the moment, because it's free, we all have access to it. So that puts us into this position where we kind of have an equality. When we started this semester, I talked a little bit to some of my students about AI. And I said, well, the thing is, you can write your essays using ChatGPT, but then I can grade them using ChatGPT. Want to grade from AI, or do you want me to read your paper? Right? So I think because we both can use it, we have to be aware of that. You may think, okay, well, I get to save time, it's fine, it's good, it gives me some help with my work. But at the same time, the teacher may say the same thing. And then we have a lot of mistrust between the two sides, right? Because then we think the students will think the teacher doesn't care about my work. The teacher thinks, oh, the student doesn't care, they just use the AI. So that's where we get back to the idea of integrity. If we keep the bargain of doing our own work, teacher and student, then we have that kind of academic integrity and our qualifications are worth something, right? If we just give up, everyone uses AI, maybe we have a very relaxing life, but maybe not very, it's not very satisfying, right? Because we don't feel like we really did something. Okay, I'm just keeping an eye on that. And I want to ask you, before we look back at the survey and open it up, are there any specific questions that people want to ask? Anything that people want to raise? So I just wanted now to look at our responses, right, on the questions that we asked. So I thought it would be quite interesting to see how people responded. So everybody's used it. Everybody's used it. Very interesting. Okay, what type? So I don't really know anything about these different types, but I know ChatGPT, Bard, and Poe. Nobody's used any others. Do you know Poe? Yeah. What's the difference? Do you have a? Yeah, I don't know either. So it's clear that these two are the most commonly used, right? And then I wanted to look at this one. Okay, useful part. So you see, this is where we have the problem with teachers and students and assignments, right? So this comes back to my point about you may find that your instructors are starting to give you different types of assignments, right? I think doing less work is not a bad thing. I'm not anti doing less work, I think it's not the same thing as lazy. We work smart, right, is a very important skill. Doing less work, again, it goes back to the idea of like washing your clothes by hand. Nobody will wash their clothes by hand if they have a washing machine. Why would you do it? There's nothing fulfilling. What we have to be careful of is what kind of work are we doing? So I think this is kind of an interesting question. Biggest problem. Yeah. So I agree that inaccurate information is still a problem. And I don't know enough about computers to know whether this is going to change. I don't know. Do you think that inaccurate information is Yeah. Yeah. So that the idea of inaccurate information may be something that we cannot solve. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, this is a good question, right? I mean, I kind of like these questions. Okay, well, maybe we should just share and we should have a look at these questions because they're kind of interesting, right? Question, how can AI tools be effectively integrated into the existing curriculum and teaching methods? The simple answer is I don't know, but the more detailed answer is I think that is a big challenge for the faculty to try to integrate them. And my feeling is that like I said, if we get out in front of it and we say, let's use AI to do this assignment. So as the example of the computer science professor who asked his students and the ChatGPT to do the final exam, I think that there is a way that we can encourage the use of AI in an appropriate manner. And perhaps it comes down to simply being upfront about it and saying to the students, in this assignment, I want you to use AI. And in this assignment, I do not want you to use AI. That's my guess. I think we can. I think it will take a lot of learning for both teachers and students really to effectively integrate. But I would suggest the two things. One is to have the faculty be very upfront and honest about the guidelines, put it onto the course outline. You know, if you use AI, you must cite it like a source, and also to include it in certain assignments, like let's use AI for this, but let's not use it for that. Yeah, questions about plagiarism, I think, is very interesting, kind of relates to a healthy academic way to incorporate AI in academic writing. So I would say you really need to, if you're from a student's perspective, I think you need to be very clear, perhaps ask your professors if they are allowing you to use it. If they are allowing you to use it, when are you allowed to use it? For what purpose are you allowed to use it? And you must cite the source. So if the professor says, yes, in this academic writing assignment, you are welcome to use AI, but you must include it in the reference list. So I think that would help. That would bridge the gap, because then you kind of said, yes, I'm going to cite it as an proofreading. Well, proofreading is an interesting aspect, because I think most of us who teach languages, Grace may also agree with this. I think most of us who teach languages expect our students to do some proofreading. I don't think we expect students not to check their work, right? And because even in Microsoft Word or any other document writing, we have a spell check. I know some people use Grammarly and things like that. I don't think that most professors have a problem with it. I don't think that we can say, proof. In fact, I think in the writing classes, we tend to encourage proof, because I think we tend to say, like, if you can see your errors, it helps you to improve. But, or if you read someone else's work and then you state, you can see their errors, they can see your errors, that kind of helps. I don't think we have a problem with proofreading. I think tools like Grammarly and other types of proofreading tools are pretty standard these days. I don't think people have any problems with that. So I guess, in a word, proofreading is not really against the rules. I think what people worry about is that ChatGPT is doing all the work, and then that comes back to the anything else? Yes, Grace pointed out a good point about writing style. Yeah, so I would say that if you revise it, you have to be really careful on how much is changed. I agree with Grace. I mean, we tend to develop a writing style without really realizing it. I think it comes to us over time. So we don't want to lose that sense of individual style. When we're writing, we want to know that, oh, it's written by you, not written by me. So I think, yes, that is a point. I would say that what's important for students is to it doesn't really matter so much, whether they are correcting their spelling or grammar or whatever, but maybe to focus more on style, right? To think, because we all kind of correct our spelling mistakes and stuff. The problem is if we revise with ChatGPT, then we have the style of ChatGPT and not the style of ourselves. Does anyone else have questions or issues, things they would like to talk about? Okay, so I would just like to thank you all very much for coming face to face, and those of you online. I'd also like to ask you to do the evaluation form for the Language Center. This is a very new and interesting area. As I said in my introduction, I am in no way a computer expert, but I do think that it's interesting to think about what we may be able to do with AI. We should not think of it as our enemy, but I don't think it is our friend. We have to be very careful. So thank you very much.